Hi, everybody. Hi, welcome. I can see people entering into this forum. We are so happy to have all of you here. My name is Angela Uerbelau. I am the founder of Oregon Kids Read. We are a grassroots network of all volunteers. We are dedicated to literacy and racial equity here in Oregon. And we're so thrilled to be partnering tonight on this forum with our partners Decoding Dyslexia at Oregon. So we're here tonight to talk about teacher training as a key to Oregon literacy. And I'm just going to kick it off with doing a little bit of road mapping, signposting of what we're going to be talking about in the next hour and the kind of order that we're going in. But the first thing I wanted to do is to invite all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat. If you could put your name, where you're from, what brings you here tonight, if you're a parent, a caregiver, an educator, a school board member, all of those things, just so that we can see who all is here tonight. That would be really great. We're grateful for each and every one of you for joining. So if you could do that, that would be wonderful. As far as the agenda, and I should mention we are recording this meeting because we've had such a tremendous response of people who say, I can't make it tonight, but I would really love to have the information. So we will be recording the panel this evening and sharing it afterwards. So as far as the agenda goes, we are going to start off with this short slideshow so that we're all kind of brought into this baseline understanding of what we're talking about tonight. And then I have some questions for each of our panelists. Some of the questions came in from some of you who registered, so we've incorporated those into this evening. I also want to acknowledge that because we're so lucky to have so many of you joining, that we might not be able to answer everyone's questions this evening. But Oregon Kids Read, and specifically Jen and I, my fellow volunteer, we're absolutely dedicated to getting you answers. So if you don't hear your particular question answered this evening, if you could fill out the form, I think Jen's going to put a link in the chat to a form. If you'll fill that out with your name, your question, and your email, and we won't be sharing your email, we'll only be using it to answer any questions that, that haven't been answered this evening. But if you could do that, that would be wonderful. So why are we here tonight? I'm going to take a breath. I've been talking so quickly, one, because I'm excited, and two, nerves. So I'm going to take a breath to center and just remind us why we're all here. We are all here because we all believe that literacy is a civil right and that each and every one of our children in Oregon deserves access to reading. And at Oregon Kids Read, we have been pushing state leaders to fully fund and offer teacher training in the science of reading to every K-5 teacher and reading specialist at our most struggling schools. That's why we're here tonight, is to talk about how we fix the literacy crisis and support our students. So I'm really grateful to all of the panelists here tonight. They're all amazing. Amazing. And I'll be introducing them each as we go. But I believe Jen's also going to put all of their names and positions in the chat. So if you think, oh, I wonder who spoke, I want to go back, or I'm wondering who's going to speak next, she'll have all of the names and positions there. So we're going to start off with Dr. Tanya Mckee. She's going to share the slideshow that I mentioned. And I also want to acknowledge we have a lot of different experiences, deep experiences joining us here in the room. So some of you may know some of this information, and we really appreciate your willingness to re-engage with it tonight if it's something that you've already kind of familiarized yourself with. And if it's brand new to that, brand new to you, we're so excited that you're here to join us tonight in the learning. So Dr. Tanya Mckee is the former Senior Director of Humanities at Portland Public Schools, and she is currently the interim principal at Ockley Green Middle School, and she is going to walk us through this slideshow. We'll kick it off to you, Tanya. Thank you so much.
All right. Good evening, everyone. So Ross, if you want to go ahead and put the PowerPoint up. All right. Just really quickly, introduce myself. I'm Tanya Mckee, and I am a mother of 3 children. My youngest is a kindergartner, and I have been in K-20 education for 26 years. I am a literacy advocate. I'm a gifted and talented advocate. I believe strongly that all kids should receive a world-class education. And I also am continually making the statement that literacy is a civil right. And so I'm coming to you tonight, as she mentioned, for the last 2 years, I was the Senior Director of Humanities. And in August, I asked to go to Ockley Green and be the principal for the year. And it's great to be back in a building and working directly with students. But the message that we have tonight is really important. As we continue to push this work forward, work's happening all across the nation, and we need to have this work happening here in Oregon. And I'm really thankful for the others that came tonight that will be answering the questions and so forth. So real quickly, you can go to the next slide, Kaveh, is that many that are around me probably comes out of my mouth on most days. But when you look at this, that we have a literacy crisis, and I hear, from others, right? We have a literacy crisis, not just in Oregon, but across the country. But I feel really strongly about the fact that we don't sit back and say, well, it's happening everywhere, so it's okay. It should be like, it's happening everywhere, and we're in Oregon, and we can do something about this. And so when you look at this, you see that, 7% of third graders, only 26% of African-American third graders, 8% of English learners are not being taught to read. Next slide. So I think this piece is incredibly important to say many times, is that not only is it not unique, but if more than a third of our children, can't read by 4th grade, and I want to make sure I say this right from the very beginning, Oregon teachers aren't to be blamed for what they don't know. Matter of fact, you're going to hear from some amazing teachers tonight, and teachers that when I first asked about anybody being interested in going to letters training, just saying, I want this, right? I want to learn this. I am going to meet the needs of my kids. And I think that's a really important message to start with, is that it's about getting better at getting better. And just being realistic, and we've had this conversation with many teacher prep programs, but half of them provide to ensure that our graduates have what they need to be successful when they start teaching. Next slide. So, there's decades of research, right? And that there are, research that states that reading problems are preventable when we have appropriate instruction. The idea that when intensive help is provided, students are able to improve. And so I feel strongly about making sure that we do everything in our power that we can to ensure that teachers have all of the tools so that they're able to support kids and get them to read. Next slide. So really, really excited to share, and some of you already know this, and you have all the teachers, and matter of fact, the majority of the teachers that are on the panel were the first group of teachers and administrators that started the letters training in spring of 2020. Matter of fact, just a couple of weeks after we went into pandemic mode, and the teacher said, I'm still in. I was part of this group. I'm also have been through letters training, the complete training, and I couldn't be more proud of the teachers and principals in the Portland Public Schools that said, I'm in. With everything else that I have going on, I'm going to do this. And I can tell you that it's incredibly challenging, and it's worth every exhaustion, maybe, I don't know what the right word is, but as a mom of a kindergartner, and my daughter was sitting side by side me when we were doing the training. So powerful that teacher said, sign me up. I want to do this. And even when times were challenging because we had so much on our plate, teacher said, can you help me figure out a way that I can get this training done? I'm just going to have to spread it out a little bit. And so really important, last spring, administrators, 40 went through a training just for administrator for the first units 1 to 4 to learn a little bit more about letters. Next slide. So some of you may be in the audience going, well, what is the science of reading? And I think it's important to start with that there's five pillars of early literacy. So you can see phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. And so when people, I hear this all the time, they say, oh, Tanya, there's this new reading program called the Science of Reading. I said, it's not a reading program, right? There's actually decades of research out there that has identified what we need to be teaching students to ensure that we have effective reading instruction. Next slide. And so one of the visuals that we like is, or I like, we'll just say I like, is the ladder of reading. And really looking at the fact that, you're seeing that, we talk about in Louisa Moats talks about this, that, learning to read is rocket science. Is that when you look at this, this ladder, 5% learning to read seems effortless. Learning to read is relatively easy with broad instruction. But 40 to 50%, learning to read proficiently requires code-based, explicit, systematic, and sequential instruction. And then you see the 10 to 15%, right? Learning to read requires code-based and repetition, diagnostic. And we talked about our students that have dyslexia. And structured, explicit instruction, I think it's really important. People push back, and I know that there's this thing that's been out there for a while called the reading wars, is that we got to get past all that and figure out, what is it that we need to do right now for our kids? And structured and explicit instruction does benefit all kids. It doesn't harm any students. And it's critical to ensure that our students that struggle the most get what they need so that they can be successful. Next slide. So just real quickly, we know there's a reading crisis, right? I gave you those statistics. And there's also something that we can do about it, right? And teachers have been telling us that there's something we can do about it. And so I think it's really important that it's not that one training is going to be the solution, right? We call that solutionitis, right? We need to make sure that we're trying different things and we're making sure that when something works, we continue it and so forth. But I can tell you that over the last 2 years, almost 2 years, right, as teachers have been going through this training, is language essentials for teachers of reading and spelling, and why this was chosen. And that was a decision that I made in early 2020. And it was because the way that it was put together, it was scalable. There is online components. There is a reading component. You can see videos. There was a way, initially when we started, we thought we were doing some face-to-face training about every couple of months, and COVID changed that for us. But it gave us an opportunity to provide direct training for teachers and leaders. It teaches the evidence-based instructional practices. There's also tons of resources. And so what the training does is that, so for myself, I'll talk about just myself as a secondary educator. I knew a lot about comprehension, but as a secondary educator, I had never been trained on graphemes, morphemes, right? Phonemic awareness, every kind of name there was. And there was so much for me to learn. And I started to realize that as a high school social studies and language arts teacher, that I didn't reach all my kids years ago when I started teaching. And as I was going through the training, I began to recognize that there were pieces that I was missing. If I would have had that, how much more successful would my kids have been in high school than they were, right? Because of the very fact that I didn't have the tools. I didn't actually know any better. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so as we started this process in March of 2020, and the panel will talk a little bit about this, right? I had reached out to teachers and said, you've said that you need some training. Anybody interested? We had people come together at the district office for 2 different nights, had conversations, went out to schools, and they said, well, let's go for this. And I'm so proud of the teachers for sticking with it through everything that was happening. But the way that it's laid out, it allows teachers to be able to pace themselves out. It's also a great resource after. So it's not like you have 1 4-hour training, you go, yeah, I understand the science of reading. I understand Scarborough's rope. I have every single tool. It's not that way at all. There is 8 units, and you're learning about how to teach kids to read and getting different resources and learning from one another. There's a face-to-face component that we did virtually. And I think the big pieces is that, especially thinking about Oregon, and the teachers can talk about it today, is that you could have a cohort of teachers in Southern Oregon. They could be taking letters with teachers in Portland, and they could share the different practices and strategies. And so when somebody says, you know, Tanya, why did you choose letters? You know, what was behind that? And it was like, I was trying to find something that would support the needs of our teachers, and that it was flexible, it was scalable, and it was affordable. And, you know, even today, a teacher reached out to me and said, oh, I've been meaning to send you this email. I know you're now the principal over at Ockley Green, but I just want to tell you, thank you. That going through letters training has really changed how I've been able to teach reading. And I really feel like it's making a difference. And so, you know, again, the teachers and principals coming tonight is simply just to share that we can sit back and be like, man, look at these scores, right? These kids aren't reading it, and this is happening. And we can make every excuse, or we could just simply do what I did 2 years ago and said, let's just give it a shot, right? Let's just try it. And I can tell you that we changed, you know, how we delivered it with the company early on, Voyager Sopris. It actually changed throughout every cohort of teachers, because we learned from the teachers. We learned from the teachers that are on the panel tonight that there was a better way. Like, how do we get teachers more interactive? How do we put them into Zoom rooms? We started on Google Meet because that's what we were using. We moved to Zoom and so forth. And Voyager Sopris, who supports letters, was really flexible and was able to meet the needs that we had, especially during the pandemic. So I'm gonna stop there. I think that one of the pieces, that last bullet, is that it's used by more than 25 states for training teachers in the science of reading. And there are several states, Mississippi, Alabama, Maryland, Ohio, that have been putting in legislation around the science of reading, Arkansas, and really making a difference with training teachers and some additional supports as well. So I'll leave it there and let Kaveh and team answer all of the questions. Really happy that people showed up tonight. There's a lot of great people here in Portland Public that have just done amazing work for our kids. And now I'm on the receiving end of that, being in the middle school, where some of our kids have come from schools where they were just at the cusp of having some of the teachers that were learning the science of reading. So thank you for coming.
Thank you so much, Tanya. Dr. McKee. I would love next to move on to Heather Casciato, who is a 2nd grade teacher at Boise-Eliot Humboldt here in Portland Public Schools. So Heather, I have 2 questions for you. One is, why did you decide to take the letters science of reading training? It is voluntary. What was it that prompted you to take it? And how has it affected your work in your 2nd grade classroom and the efforts that you make to reach all students?
Definitely. So I'm going to say, please forgive me for reading some of my answers. I get a little nervous in a large group, and letters has really changed my teaching, and I did not want to forget any important parts. So a little background about me before I start. I was a kid who loved to read. Reading came easy to me. I read every night. And beyond letter names and letter sounds, I don't really remember any direct instruction in my education. Although I enjoyed reading, I dreaded writing and spelling. I was a terrible speller. And so first I thought that if I read more, I would become a better speller. And then I thought that as I moved to the next grade level, I was going to learn something new, and it was just going to unlock language arts for me. Something magical was going to happen. That never happened for me. I struggled so much with spelling that in grad school, I had a professor call me into their office and say that I should really consider dropping out of grad school because I would never be able to effectively communicate through writing with my families or my peers. So they asked me to really consider that. Needless to say, I did not drop out, and I was determined to prove them wrong. So then fast forward as a teacher, I was always a little lost as to how to help my struggling readers and my writers. For example, our class would talk about how certain letter combinations made certain sounds, but I could never really tell them the how and the why. I knew that piece was missing for me. I couldn't figure it out for myself, and I couldn't unlock it for them. And I knew that was a piece I needed to figure out. And I certainly never realized the importance of phonemic awareness. I was never confident in my schedule that I put together, and I had no idea really where to focus my energy. And that's where letters came in for me. Along came letters, and everything really changed. It put together all those pieces I was looking for. It was something I needed as a student, as a kid, and it was definitely something I've needed all along as a teacher. It made everything click for me. It's drastically changed my teaching in every aspect. I now have a language arts schedule that I'm extremely confident in. I know where to focus my energy. It flows. I have kids that are excited, and the most engagement I've seen. They're confident, and I now hear things like, "Oh, I get it now," when they're reading, or they're excited to show me what we've been working on when they find it in their books and they're reading. So just the energy in the room is completely different for me. I guess, all of these things let me know I'm on the right track. And as a bonus, I've become a better speller, so that's kind of nice. And I'm definitely a more confident language arts teacher. Like I just feel like I can answer the questions, I have the answers, and I know what I'm doing now.
Heather, thank you so much for that. Thank you very much. Just hearing your personal journey as well as your professional journey is very much appreciated. So thank you. Thank you very much. And I could just keep talking for a very long time or asking more questions, but because we do have 60 minutes together, I'm going to move on to Cathy Parker. Cathy is a reading interventionist at Woodlawn K5 here at PPS. And Cathy, I'm wondering if you can talk about how you've used your knowledge from the training in your work with students as an interventionist. And for some of us, myself included, if you could also just tell us a little bit about what a reading interventionist does.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to tell you because I put that on myself. I'm really a reading specialist. I didn't really feel like for a while I was a specialist. Interventionist means that I work with kids, the lowest kids, they're called tier 3, the ones that really need the help. And just to give you a little bit of background, I taught second grade for 13 years, and I love reading. I love teaching reading, but I felt like I I wasn't reaching the kids. And that was it was terrible for me. And I realized that when I graduated, I was never taught how to teach reading. And so I had to search and search for things for myself when teaching reading. And I think I did my kids a disservice about teaching reading. So after teaching second grade for 13 years and going through curriculum after curriculum, I became the reading specialist interventionist at Woodlawn Elementary School, where I'm working with 1st through 5th graders who are struggling in reading. And I'm so excited for the Letters program because I've been asking and searching out, how am I going to teach reading? Why aren't these kids meeting grade level? And so when Letters came on, they said, do you want to go do this Letters? Oh yeah, I want to see. You know, I thought it was another curriculum because really we kept getting curriculum after curriculum, but a curriculum says one size fits all. And we know one size doesn't fit all when it comes to learning for kids. Kids learn different ways. So the curriculum that they were giving us, the phonics curriculum, was not strong enough because it was based on one size fits all. So when Letters came along, and I just wanted to see, can this help me? And I was so excited. What I did learn, which was something, I've been learning a lot about reading over the years myself, but what I learned from Letters is, oh my goodness, language, reading, writing, and spelling are so connected. You need that, teachers need that. And also this systematic approach to reading and the reading brain was so important. Learning about how kids learn by their brain. Where do they decode? Where does the phonics come from? That is so much knowledge that teachers need to know that in order to teach reading, in order to teach all kids, I should say, because you have to know where a kid's weakness is when it comes to reading. So I thought Letters taught me a lot about that. And I've been using all the strategies, and I liked, is it Tanya, what you said about how you don't have to learn everything at once. It takes you step by step through reading where you can practice with your own kids and see how it works. And so I just love that I love the knowledge about the training of the brain, which looks at the root cause of strengths in the area of the reading where a child is weak. So you can know how to teach reading. And I mean, there's so much to say about, I'm just so excited. And it works with all kids, okay? My 5th graders who are weak in phonemic awareness, I'm able to get them up and running so they can get to that comprehension part, which is, so important. So it has a lot of impact of what I'm doing right now as a reading interventionist, like I said, working with kids who struggle with reading. And I'm so excited that I'm really into our kids of color who are not getting reading. And it doesn't matter where you come from, your social economic. I know a lot of people say, well, that kid's not reading because their family life and everything. We can't control that. But with the Letters program, it helped us to focus on getting that kid where it needs to be and forgetting about the things that we can't control. So I'm excited about it. I think it should have been in the grad programs a long time ago, but it's much needed for all teachers. And it's well worth it. Speaking from a reading specialist. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathy. I really appreciate that. And something you said just now really struck me about the fact that this knowledge and training should be happening at the higher ed level. It should be happening in the teacher prep programs. And I just want to say that with Oregon Kids Read, as I mentioned before, we're all volunteer, we're an advocacy network. We have no financial or other affiliation with Letters or with Voyager Sopris, the parent company. We are advocating for it because, as Cathy has pointed out, and Heather and Tanya, it's scalable, it's affordable. These things are, important to us. And we are also still advocating and asking higher ed institutions to join in partnership with us in this work. And I do want to make a shout out to Eastern Oregon University, who are very dedicated to revamping their curriculum around the science of reading in their teacher prep program. And they also are offering graduate credit for teachers going through letters. So a huge thank you to them. It's part of the process of how we fix this pipeline issue of teachers not getting what they need at the teacher prep level. So I'm now going to introduce Kaveh. Kaveh Pakseresht is the principal at Boise-Eliot Humboldt here in Portland. And my question for Kaveh, or there's a couple of them, how has the training impacted your school as a whole? And have you seen benefits and or challenges to having shared content across grade levels and across the whole building?
Thank you, Angela. Well, first, I just want to say the power in this is with all of our teachers. Our teachers are so amazing and so willing to jump in. Our school shifted not only to like jumping into the letters work and into the science of reading, but also we went into a departmentalized approach. And so we actually have, like we heard from Heather earlier, she's teaching every single second grader how to read. And so there's not going to be this like haves and have-nots, and all of our teachers jumped on board with this, and our math teachers are getting something separate to get that going. And so I just want to recognize, and we have other teachers from our building, our amazing teachers in the house right now too, listening to this conversation, a part of that. So at every grade level, we have a teacher that got letters trained and is kind of rolling that out along there with the entire grade level. And so for that, what that did is really allowed us to now have conversations across grade levels about, you know, with the same background information and knowledge around how do we support our kids, where did they leave off before, and what are the pieces we still need to be working on. And it just gives us that common language and that understanding of, you know, where are the gaps and how do we move that forward. I think, you know, clearly the pandemic and virtual learning really got in the way of where we could have got last year, but I'm so excited about this year. I actually was pulling out some map data and was already like digging into it, because I was like, I don't even care where they're at right now. I'm just excited to see what we're going to be able to do this year, being able to kind of fully realize having students in person and being able to deliver this instruction across all grade levels. I just think it changes the game for teachers, and teachers want to feel successful and want to have the tools in order to move kids forward. It makes your job, even though the life of a teacher is very stressful, it's way more enjoyable when you see the progress that you're making and you can understand what your next move is. Because I think you're always faced with different challenges and pieces you have to fill. And when you don't have the tool in your toolbox to handle that, that just adds to the frustration. And so just seeing our teachers be able to do that, and also then having thought partners, right? Because the letters training, like I heard Tanya say earlier, it's not a program. It's about the fact of having the tools to be able to teach kids how to read effectively. And so at any grade level now, you're equipping those teachers with all the tools to meet a kid no matter where they're at. It's not like the tools change for your 5th grade teacher to your 2nd grade teacher to your kindergarten teacher. You just need to know how to deliver them. And so I think that's the biggest piece that changed for us, and that's the biggest piece that we're seeing within our school. And then I think just the model of doing it, what you do is you see the excitement of teachers like wanting to come and join that progress and wanting to come and join that piece. So what I would encourage is for all schools to be thinking about how do we bring this in so that we can equip all of our teachers that are teaching reading with the tools they need in order to feel successful and move kids forward.
Thank you, Kaveh.
Anything, Angela?
What was that?
You're gonna have to let me know if I missed anything.
Oh my gosh, I don't think so. There is an administrator's training, isn't for letters? Is that something that that you were interested in, or that you would recommend for other principals considering?
Yeah, 100%. I think that you can't really lead teachers or help, and I wouldn't even say lead teachers. You can't really be on board and work alongside teachers and doing this work unless you at least have some background knowledge. And I still, and Tanya, you can hold me to this, I still plan on going through the full training, but I haven't been able to dive fully into that yet. And my teachers know that, and I let them know I'm trying to get a little bit. But even just to have the language and the common understanding of it is just helpful in order to help be a part of those conversations and be a thought partner, and also to be able, you know, often as the administrator, you're working at all grade levels. And so being able to also be that conduit for students as they move from grade level to grade level, and be able to be in that conversation and be able to speak from where they came from to where they are now.
That's awesome. Thank you, Kaveh. We are now going to go to Elizabeth Israel Davis. She is a humanities teacher on special assignment for dyslexia. That's a TOSA, is the acronym for teacher on special assignment within PPS. And Elizabeth, I have a couple of questions for you. Can you speak to how the training can improve literacy for all students, including English language learners and students with dyslexia? And how can the training help teachers assess students and use that data to identify who may need more intervention?
Thank you. I also did some writing down, so you might see my eyes go off to the side here a little bit, just to, again, make sure that I remembered everything. So as so many have already said, that letters, it's what we all should have learned in our elementary teacher prep programs. I see the stories are just like, it's such a similar story over and over again. We should have had this. I have to admit, I was a tiny bit annoyed when I learned about letters, because I had to chase all this stuff down myself. And then I saw it was all in just this one little like package. But I'm just glad I want everybody to have that. So this training can improve literacy for all students, and I'll tack on some more about English language learners in that, and I feel like I'm going to repeat some of what others have already said. It helps educators to understand the process of becoming a literate person, and why we would employ certain instructional methods versus others. And once a teacher understands that, then they can vet or assess an instructional material for themselves and decide if this is what's targeting what the student needs, which leads into assessment. But I'll come back to assessment. With English language learners, there's again just that fact that all humans learn to read by developing that same pathway and repurposing that same like teeny tiny piece of brain real estate. So knowing that is for everybody, but in addition, there are parts of letters that talk about, specifically about teaching reading in English with English learners. So making sure that there are specific parts about making sure to understand that, the similarities and differences between just even the phonemes in that student's L1, their first language, and the language of instruction, and down to the part of like, and you also need to make sure that like maybe this phoneme is in their language, but it never appears at the end. So just helping teachers to learn to be aware of that, and to learn to be aware of the influence of vocabulary and syntax learning as it all wraps into this learning to be literate. And then assessment. So there are actual just assessments within letters that you go through learning how to use them. There's a phonics survey and a spelling inventory and phonemic awareness, which is actually just Dr. Kilpatrick's past. And what letters really does to help with this assessment is it helps to teach teachers to think diagnostically about literacy and their instruction. So like it's here's what they're doing, and now what is the underlying factor in this outcome the student they're reading or they're spelling. It's kind of like if you know all of the ingredients that are going into a thing, you can then taste it and see which is the thing that what does it need. Don't taste students though. So there are also some age and grade level guidelines so that you kind of know, like, I have a second grader, which again, I also taught second grade. I don't know what it is about second grade that makes people activists. I have a second grader, this is what they're doing. This is kind of what I would expect them to be doing. Where's the in between, and how can I shuffle through to find that? Did I miss anything on that?
No, not at all. I think, oh, I guess Elizabeth, and maybe you mentioned this, but students with dyslexia, how does letters, I know the assessment part that you just talked about might relate to that, but if you could speak to that as well, how the training might impact that.
So students who have dyslexia, like I said before, we all learn to read by making those same pathways in that same space. Students who have dyslexia, they're going to need more repetitions, more practice, and a narrower focus to get there. So if I spent a lot of my first search trying to find, like, what is the magic way? I know there's got to be a way that I teach kids with dyslexia how to read. I know it exists. And then learning that, oh, we just haven't been teaching everybody the way that they need to learn how to read, except for that little narrow window. So with this, you can catch students earlier, and then really see, like, as you are narrowing your focus of instruction, increasing your practice time, increasing your repetitions, seeing that you can see earlier on, if you are teaching this way, maybe there is something going on. Maybe this student has dyslexia and we need to get them some intervention. Whereas if you are not teaching in this systematic manner that you learn how to do with letters, and you learn why you're doing it that way, a lot of the time you're just like, oh, they're a late bloomer, which, you know, I know a lot of people who are probably here have had that heartbreak. So that is how it can help students who have dyslexia.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That was super helpful. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you. I am going to take a minute now and circle back to Tanya, to Dr. McKee. Tanya, can you talk a little bit more about how you set up the letters training within PPS? And also, I think you may have mentioned this, or someone, I think it was Kaveh, mentioned MAPS, but could you also talk about how student outcomes might be measured as we start to move in PPS, you know, having teachers go through the program and using the training in the classroom, and what we might be looking for in terms of its impact with students.
Yeah, sure. So, oops, that I muted myself. Okay. So, really, I mean, how I started the conversation was having conversations with people like Elizabeth Israel Davis and our dyslexia parent group and some of our reading interventionists. A couple of them are on, I saw them pop on, is that what I was really looking for is I was looking for something. So some of you know my background is in improvement science methodology, and I was looking for a change idea. And my change idea was around letter science of reading. And I thought, you know, let's try it. And so in terms of setting it up, I really went forward with sharing with reading interventionists, with teachers, and just saying, hey, you know, what do you guys think? Right? Like, do you think this would work? Are you interested in joining us? And then having conversations with principals like Kaveh, and having a conversation with the staff to say, you know, this is kind of where we're sitting in terms of 26% of Black students aren't learning to read by third grade. We got to do something. Like, this has to be at the top of everything that we're doing. We have to focus on Black, Brown, and our Indigenous students in the Portland Public Schools. And so in terms of setting it up, and this is just part of my leadership, is that I like to give options. I like to give people choices. And to me, it was a change idea initially. Like, I wonder if this will actually work. And so just sharing what my thoughts were. I never said this was the end all be all. I didn't say it was a solution. I said, you know, do you want to come along with me, right? Like, this is what I'm understanding the training looks like it's well scaffolded and it might work for us. We also, I think a really important piece that we did, especially in our first couple cohorts, is as we were talking to principals and teachers and principals gave us feedback as to how to set it up, right? Like, are we trying to figure out, like we try to create a schedule of, you know, how fast you're moving through the modules and when we're going to have face-to-face. And I would say that what helped us with us the most was getting that teacher feedback through the modules when we set it up. So initially it's units 1 to 4. And we had the pacing from Voyager Sopris, and we kind of knew like how much time it would take to read and to do the module and to do what's called the bridge to practice, gives you an opportunity to, practice what you learned. And so we started to put together, different pacings, and then we met with teachers. And I'll be honest, what was super helpful as one of the leaders is I went through the training in that first group. And so did others on my team. And so we were able to have these ongoing conversations about what's working, what's not, what should we change up. And so being a leader that's open-minded and willing to make changes as you go is incredibly helpful to the process. I've never been somebody to make anybody do anything. I feel like you need to meet people where they're at and give them an opportunity and then help them be successful. The same thing with students. And honestly, that's kind of what happened. We started to build this community of teachers, and teachers were giving feedback. And, after we got into like our 4th cohort, we're like, oh my gosh, like we're over like 200 and some teachers. And our waiting list was like just growing. And so part of it was trying to figure out, you always have to figure out, do you have the money, right? Like how much is it going to cost per teacher? How are we going to, set this up? Then of course we did some of the face-to-face pieces. And then another thing that we really looked at was making sure that we had other supports in place. So one of the big pieces, we created a K-12 intervention team of TOSAs to help. Emily Bennett's on the call, and she was the letters TOSA. She started right in the pandemic, and she is the TOSA assigned to support letters, meeting with teachers, helping teachers, and making sure that they were getting signed up. But, again, it's figuring out how the pacing is, and then just being incredibly transparent, listening to your leaders, listening to your teachers, and creating a plan that works. And then as you go, making sure that you're being flexible so that you can meet the needs of teachers, because a lot of things happened starting in March of 2020 and they're still happening. And we had to be able to flex with it, right? We might have gotten to a point where people are like, right now I've gotten through units 4, I want to continue, but I need a break because I have so much on my plate. Great. We'll offer that training, to finish the letters training in 4 more months. And so I think it's just really important to be transparent. I think that would be great to get some additional funding across the state so that teachers have the option to be part of the learning. But being transparent and just recognizing that once you are letters trained, that there's other supports that need to be in place. There needs to be, some additional coaching. And like Kaveh mentioned, being able to have conversations in the building, amongst your teams. How do you use your PLCs to have conversations about data? And so like Angela mentioned, when we started this process prior to COVID, we were like, well, we'll take a look at the map and look to see, if we see any, if we see changes, with our student scores, of course, 3rd grade through 8th grade, and then looking at other measures. We have Dibbles that we've been using. There's other tools out there. And so the other pieces is that there's a pre-test for teachers and there's a post-test after units 1 to 4. And that also gave us a data point of where teachers scored when they came in and took the pretest and where they scored at the end, as well as with the first 2 cohorts. We also did a survey to find out what did the teachers learn, right? So I think there's other measurement points besides, just the, 1 or 2 data points for students. Part of it is are students enjoying learning to read? there's some qualitative data out there. And then also, I think one of the things that's always I've been curious about is, what does teacher retention look like once teachers have been trained in the science of reading, specifically letters, to see if that retention, improves.
Tanya, you mentioned the number of units. Can you talk about sort of cumulative, how much time is needed for the training, about how many hours? And also in terms of the cost for your budget, when you were the Senior Director of Humanities, was it for the training and then also teacher compensation, or how can you talk? We've had some questions about those two things.
So approximately the way the training is set out is about 50 hours for units 1 to 4. And again, it just depends. It depends on where you are. It depends on how fast of a reader you are. I was a secondary educator. Units 1 to 4 took me a long time, more than 50 hours. It wasn't good to try to multitask at the same time. So I really had to dedicate some time, but approximately 50 hours for units 1 to 4, approximately 50 hours for units 5 to 8. And again, as we started this training, we thought it was important to recognize the dedication of our teachers as professionals and provide them extended hours to engage in the training. And so that is how we budget. So it depends on what your average, we did by the average extended hour rate of pay is in Portland. And we were looking at 50 hours compensation for units 1 to 4, and then 50 hours for units 5 to 8. I mean, what I can say is that when you think about how much a college class costs, what you're paying teachers to spend the time to better themselves and support kids, really outweighs the cost. In terms of paying for the modules, so you're paying for the book and the modules. It kind of is fluctuated, but let's just go with $375 right there for units 1 to 4 and $375 for the second. And then there's always shipping too. So the shipping cost, because it's a big manual. And then the third part is the virtual face-to-face, or eventually, hopefully it will be face-to-face. And that cost is around $3,000 a day, and you can have 40 participants. And so it kind of just depends upon, what you're setting up. We did a lot of different things. We did cohorts for our ESL teachers, and we tried a high school group of teachers and interventionists. And so we did play around a little bit with the hours, but approximately, the biggest cost was the extended hours. And I would say was the best spent money was to ensure that teachers as professionals were paid for the work that they were putting in. And so I see Emily would know, she did all of the orders for us the last 2 years. And like she said, if we bundle it, you save a little bit of money as well.
Thank you, Tanya. I know we only have a few minutes left together, about 6 minutes. And Heather, I don't mean to put you too much on the spot, but I would like to circle back to, the inspiration for this forum is urging state leaders to find the money to offer this training to all K-5 teachers and reading specialists in our most struggling schools. And so as a second grade teacher who's gone through the training, what would you like to say to state leaders who are considering this? Hopefully they are considering this, making that investment, especially if we're looking at, smaller districts or rural districts or coastal districts that might not have the same kind of access to resources as PPS.
I would urge anybody that can to use letters. I don't know. I don't really have words for how much it has changed my teaching, and the impact I see in my kids. I feel like it's worth every penny. It's worth the the late nights reading and trying to figure it out and implementing it and all those things. This is my 17th year teaching, and I just think of all those struggling readers I had before, and how painful teaching reading could be sometimes. And it didn't need to be. It just really didn't need to be that way. If only I had this sooner. If only I had this in grad school, I probably would have felt a bit more confident about myself also. So.
Thank you, Heather. I really appreciate that. I really do. We have 5 minutes left together. I want to just take a minute to thank every single one of the panelists for your words tonight. It's not easy to share about things that we didn't know in the past, and it's processing some real disappointment and grief sometimes about that, and then moving towards the ability to really reach all students. And so thank you for sharing that journey with us. I know there are many people tonight who had questions in the chat, and apologies that we weren't able to get to all of those questions. But again, if you would please fill out the form and put your question in there and your email address, Jen and I at Oregon Kids Read will get back to you. And we invite you to continue this advocacy journey with us in moving the state forward, in taking some of the lessons and the hard work that have been done at Portland Public Schools and offering that to the rest of the state, regardless of how well or under-resourced your particular district may be. And I would like, with your permission, to close tonight, just to refocus why this conversation is so vital. I know that some of you may remember that a couple of years ago, here in the Portland metro area, a young man was arrested after bringing a gun to his high school. And I just want to read to you a line from the Oregonian article after that happened. He, the young man, he told officers that his poor performance in school, even when he studied hard for tests and tried to stay organized, was a primary driver of his sense of hopelessness. And I'm leaving that sentence with you because this feels like a very hopeful conversation. It's what we want for all of our children. We want every single child who's trying their best to feel a sense of hope and accomplishment. And I'm so grateful to each and every one of you for participating in this conversation tonight. I hope it's the first of many. If you have any questions, again, please, you can go to our website, Oregon Kids Read. Let's stay connected and stay in conversation for students all across the state. I'm grateful to all of you. We're going to let you go a few minutes early. Thank you for sharing your evening with us, and take care. Thank you, everybody.